Oldor had firmly established his fiefdom in the Atalan Mountains. To the north, ships took word of his achievements back towards the Dwarven heartlands. Some even returned with more willing volunteers for the project, who found their arrival in Araby smooth and well provisioned. The influx of people and materials to the mountain valley must have rivaled the very establishment of the ancient Dwarven Empire, whose tunnels were daily excavated in the lower reaches of the Carracks. Yet that same influx was hard to ignore for those beings that sought concentrations of warm-blooded prey. While rumours of danger abounded, such things were common among the old human population of the valley. Oldor had heard of vile darknesses of all kinds since the day of his first arrival. If he needed confirmation of danger on the surface, he received it in the clearest terms possible, roughly 6 months after the conclusion of the Bretonnian campaign. There was a dire incident that served as a timely portent for what misery the Enterprise was designed to endure. Some 300 dwarves, freshly adorned in Oldor's legionary kit, were to march from Vulture Mountain in the south to Martek Fortress in the north, where Oldor was gathering his retinue to begin investigating corruption among the human population. They were 2 days clear of their start point when a sound like crumbling rock came from both sides of the dusty road. From a depression on the left and a thin copse on the right came the heralds of chaos, twisted mutants born from the last age of darkness, named in whole the Beast Men. A Beastman was not a species in the sense of a Dawi or Umgi, as no two were quite the same creature. Each was a mix of man, with all the variants therein, and one of the countless beasts conducive to chaos energy. Hooves, wings, claws, and talons bore down upon the 300 from all directions, save below. The hairy, almost human Ungor warriors struck with spears and axes. When these broke upon Dwarven metal, the Ungor bent over and rammed their heads into shields with bestial fury. Harpies scratched and bit from above, the downdraft of all their flapping wings putting out matches in the midst of being set to musket powder. It was almost impossible to load those muskets with the beasts pushing the Dawi together into tight balls. Huge wolves, with horns of goats and teeth seeping poison, leapt atop the metal platform the corralled dwarves formed, free to prey on whatever part of it they chose. Such was the demise of those 300, feasted upon by the outriders of the Chaos God's forces. The so-called Bray Herd marauded around the valley in the coming weeks, driving off the tiny human communities here and there, yet also slaying the feral orcs those humans usually skirmished with. Once satiated, they seemed to disappear into the impassable mountains, liable to emerge without warning again. By the time word of this reached Oldor, he was already part way across the desert to Al-Haik. He started back, then heard of the Brayherd's disappearance. The Carracks remained untouched, which brought relief to all despite the tragic loss of so many Dawi. Steeling themselves, the Legion carried on with their mission. Al-Haik was as escapees had warned. Boats coming and going in this part of the world invariably attracted enterprising vampires, eager to sample the flavors of Astalia, Satosa, and Araby. The leaderless, nearly lawless castle town was a feast. Moreover, a feast that grew with every bite. The curse of vampirism spread as the dark magic the vampires forged within them infected the townspeople as silently as any plague. If only that was the worst of it. The Pale of Undeath took hold quickly, and a pool of enthralled servants presented themselves to the most powerful of the vampires, fresh from the hospices and burial mounds. Soon a growing army had what remained of the population under siege or fleeing. Such things were routine anywhere humans gathered, for they were by far the most vulnerable to the chains of reanimation. Oldor's arrival put an end to this swiftly, his uncaring barrage cutting down the dark hosts by the sheer momentum of speeding shot. Piles of re-rotting flesh made grim milestones on the roads around Al-Haik. Oldor encamped his legion a few miles west of the city, where some engineers from the Carracks were clearing up the last of the wrecked expedition ship. Oldor had just finished speaking with these engineers in the camp when Khazran approached with a greyish jar in his hands. The engineers glanced nervously at Khazran, then took their leave quickly. "You have a new recipe, Crompson?" Oldor asked. "No, Lord. Or maybe yes, in a sense," Khazran said, clunking the jar onto a stool. "It's the sand I was looking at. The more I inspect it, the more I'm sure it's been transmuted. Dark magic at work, as we thought." "Can it be prevented?" "Prevented? I've no clue. Think about it though. If those forces can bring about this transformation, this alteration of material properties, what else might be within its power? I tried a few things with it. Doesn't burn or anything useful. But it's not just sand anymore. Start of something alchemical though, I really think." "I disagree. Dark magic's dark magic. No use to anyone who wants to do any good." "Of all the grumblers, I thought you'd see it the simplest, Lord. It could have uses for us. And we're here for good, I'm led to believe." "Don't make a beardling's mistake, Crompson. Just because we're doing things the new way, doesn't mean everything the Holds have shunned is gold sheathed in coal dust." Oldor took the jar in his hands. Khazran began reaching out for it too, but recoiled without subtlety. "Some methods are better kept secret," Oldor added, quitting the boxy tent with this remark, the jar still in hand. Khazran's smile faltered. The next morning the host was away, returning to the mountains. Below foot there was plenty of the same black sand, holding the dark magic the vampires had manifested in its many crystals. The Dawi mainly saw it in simpler terms, save for Khazran. He soon understood that the corrupted sand absorbed shadows in the same way regular magical crystals could absorb light, multiplying the essence that fell upon it to become a powerful magical reagent. Sure that Oldor was overlooking something important, he smuggled another jar into his pack as they carried on. As the dwarves disappeared again into their warrens, cracks began to spread over the world their vault doors shut out. There was utter despair among the old Bretonnian towns when a horde of savage orcs crossed the southern marches and traced a path of destruction along the coast. The docklands of the errant orders were set ablaze by rampaging beasts, their famous green skin serving as ample armor against the puny Umgi who dared resist. It was a scene from familiar histories to those Dawi rangers shadowing the warband's advance. It was the greenskins that had shrunk the eternal empire of the dwarves piece by piece over the millennia, and harried the holds of the World's End mountains still. The only relief now was that freshly spawned orcs were no great military players, brute strength aside. They bore makeshift weapons, clubs and sharpened metal plates. A few rode atop half-tamed boars, crashing around fishing villages, spreading fire and blood. Others had poorly fashioned bows, and always walked at the back of the band. These were the weak, bullied into shooting at a distance for the amusement of the rest. The bullying was organized by their war boss, Bootlicker, a name suggestive of higher bosses still yet to reveal themselves from the southern mire. There was every chance that their rampage would go astray by era of navigation, and the band would be turned to festering baked sand in the endless Arabian interior. Unfortunately, the humans were fleeing their advance in droves, revealing in their escape shaded routes packed with streams and fresh human meat. The tumultuous exodus brought the survivors to Alhaik Castle, having seen every other Bretonnian colony burned to the ground. The orcs were practically galloping on all fours in their excitement to give the shiny white castle the same treatment. By this time, news of the devastation had reached even the deepest layers of the Carracks. The Legion was preparing their equipment slowly. Pragmatically, there was no reason to take on large risks on behalf of the lands beyond the mountains. Even Oldor, with his far-seeing eye for world events, was content to brood over his immortal seed, as per his plan. What could be said, though, when the rumble of the ground above brought out a chorus of rattling ale flasks on the long feasting tables? The beast men, doubled in their number since their last foray, had returned to the valley. Their numbers left no space between the mountains on either side, and the noise of their snorts and howls echoed inescapably into every nook of the northern reaches. There they descended upon the fortress at Martek. 800 Dawi, a sizable portion of Oldor's growing Obsidian Legion, were present to oversee restoration of the underway in the region. It is a blessing that they had not finished their task, or the passages to the renewing Carracks in the south would have been overrun. Instead, it was merely the surface that was the plaything of the beast's fury. A full day and night of blood left none living, and Martek reduced to rubble, wet with gore. The spring the fort overlooked ran dark and clotted, spreading a veil of disease that slew more even after the horde left. They had gone north, away from the valley again, a chance mercy that gave Oldor room to remake the weapons and armor lost, assembling the largest legion yet to face the beastmen when they inevitably returned. This, though, was to take many months, leaving Arabian towns like Belaliad to die without recourse. There was, though, a strange twist of fate that brought a sight for sore eyes to the trapped people of Al-Haik. It began with a cold wind blowing down the Atalan Valley, so fiercely that it almost opened the doors to Vulture Mountain Carrack on its own. After the wind came a procession of wooden boats, borne on ranks of trudging skeletons, with large leaves swinging by some magic at their sterns. A panic spread, and everyone below ground felt sure that battle was imminent, until from this undead convoy came a single figure, his decayed face framed by a detailed golden headdress. The face itself framed a remarkable set of teeth, as black as the steel of the Obsidian Legion. This latter feature earned the timeless man the epithet the Black. When Oldor, Khazran and Story came surface to meet with him, they learned his given name, Arkan, Grand Vizier of the first Necromancer Nagash, rightful heir to the Old Kingdom and defier of the Chaos Gods. There were more titles given, but it was that last one which proved to be the cause of this strange meeting. Sitting in a hastily assembled wooden pavilion, flanked by skeletons bearing gifts of water and fruits long past being safe for the Dawi to consume, Arkan the Black laid out his embassy in an anemic voice.
What creature of life or death does not draw the ire of chaos? Have cheer behind your folden crests, and dream of what malice chaos holds for that which will not die. Lord Nagash saw through their veil, and conjured eternal life so as to poison the playthings of the gods. The scheme of chaos is undone before this magic. It is with softened tones that word of your like intent seeps to my chambers. Yes, there is wisdom there, for chaos must abhor that before death as much as that beyond it. I would have us be the blades that tear the canvas of coming unreality.
It's old world he's talking, I'm sure of it. No meaning at all, though, Khazran murmured to Story. I believe I roughly follow. He wants to work together, Story replied. Ah, well that can't be put simpler, can it? A fine idea. I wouldn't mind getting my grubby digits on whatever they're using to make those skeleton chamberlains move around. Dark magic, Khazran, nothing more. Dark magic ain't nothing. Insofar as it numbers among the threats to our holds, Lord Oldor will have to dismiss this charming fellow with tact. Oldor, after hearing Arkan preach his own claims to be the true ruler of the deserts on account of some very old history, whispered something to Story. Ah, gold. That will ease their sorrows, Story nodded. He returned to the pagoda with a few chests of masterfully engraved golden tokens. Oldor offered them to Arkan. However, it was no consolation. Let this gift of gold mark the beginning of our joint efforts, Your Highness. Story was lost for words, while Khazran beamed and let out a most undiplomatic round of solo applause. Oldor leered at him and waved him off, before bowing at Arcan's feet. "An alliance of life and undeath. Chaos will face both of its foes, under sand and mountain alike. You've an oath on that," Oldor said. Archon didn't understand the weight of a Dwarven oath, yet the gold got the point across well enough. He rose his hand. There was a sound like distant thunder, followed by a rising hiss that resembled a violent exhalation. It grew to be unbearably loud, then fell as if moving off down the valley, leaving patches of it resonating like whispers.
"So shall both we be ready, shrunken kings of stone,"
he said through his obsidian smile. It wasn't until long after the skeletons had marched away to their hidden tombs in the west that any of the Dawi discovered what Archon had orchestrated. It was a happy discovery. Outside the walls of Al-Haik, on a hillside shadowed by the scrappy orc camp, the sands began to shake and shimmer. An ancient army emerged, bone by bone, their weapons unweathered and loose-fitting armor still clean. Entrained by the dark magics of the ancient Tomb King Ramekt, they gathered at once into a battle line. Shields and spears were arrayed at the amused orcs. Happy for a break from the drudgery of a siege, they all raced to be first to attack these strange-looking meatless humies. Dusty longbows clacked, bronze shields clanked, jade-encrusted curved swords whirled. The orcs laughed at how measly the skeletons' teeth were in comparison to their own, but the lack of muscle didn't stop spears being thrust right through the chests of even the larger boys. Bootlicker waded into the circus and demonstrated how easily the skeleton warriors might be smashed into pieces. The rest of the orcs gurgled their admiration and got to work themselves. A few hours later, all was still. Viscous orc blood was beginning to pool in the palm of the host valley. Bones were scattered and snapped all about, as if the sand had sprouted a covering of white-grey heathers. The last orc and the last skeleton had fallen. Everything was dead. But of course that cannot be. Tomb King Ramekt started to feel a little better and stood up. His mummified corpse was missing a limb, but he found it quickly, grumbling as he pottered about the field of bones and baking orc corpses. One by one, the other bones around him began to twitch. No matter how much story had argued against Oldor's unexpected pact with the undead, the results were both stark and without cost. Khazran gloated, most of the Legion grumbled, and things seemed to have taken a turn for the better. However, again Oldor had set a match beneath the incendiary belly of Araby. Arcan's awakening power would not go unnoticed by his ancient peers. As the dwarves merrily forged armors to face the beastmen, roars of long-awaited vengeance rang in distant pyramids. The abyssal power of the Tomb Kings had been unleashed.